Amongst the Straw Hats, the moss-head swordsman Rorona Zoro is one of the most liked characters around, and it's no surprise since he has some of the most iconic and awesome moments around. Whether it's Zoro defeating a powerful enemy or prioritizing his captain over anyone else, there's no shortage of moments that amplify how amazing Zoro is. So without further ado, here's a list of the top 25 Zoro moments in One Piece.
船長一人守れねえてめえの野心に見えた俺はもう二度と負けねえぞ名乗ってみろロロノアゾロ一刀流居合獅子孫孫
Starting off this list then, we have when Zoro defeated Hody Jones. Hody was the captain of the new Fishman Pirates and someone who looked up to Arlong, who you'd probably remember as the big bad fishman from the Arlong Park arc. Just like Arlong, Hody's also a vicious opponent, although not quite as strong as other characters on this list. Besides that fact, being underwater gives Fishman a significant advantage in battle, so you'd think that Zoro would have a tough time fighting Hody underwater, but no. Even while submerged underwater and on the verge of passing out, it only took Zoro a single lion's strike to take out Hody. Watching a swordsman such as Zoro fight underwater was pretty awesome itself, but the fact that it only took him a single strike to beat Hody showed that at the time, Zoro was in a league of his own. Next up, we have the fight between Zoro and another member of the worst generation, Basil Hawkins. During the awesomely animated Wano arc, Luffy and Zoro encountered Basil Hawkins, who was working under Kaido at the time. Hawkins then sends off an intimidating straw monster after the gang, but Zoro stands up to fight him. Zoro only used 2 swords to deal with this beast and successfully defended against all of its attacks before launching his Nigiri Toro Saman to wipe out the monster. Even with how intimidating the straw monster was, it didn't stand much of a chance against Zoro's strength, even when he wasn't too serious. The animation though really made the moment look gorgeous, as you could clearly see how strong these were. Coming up next is the fight when Zoro used Sogeking as a sword.
いいかSogeking姿勢を崩すなお前は刀だ弁護士を呼んでくれ私は必ず君を訴えてやる
If you've forgotten, Sogeking was Usopp in disguise, and during this moment, the two were bound together, mostly because Usopp accidentally locked himself and Zoro with the sea stone cuffs. In this difficult position, Zoro had to fight off against both Jabra and Gaku, so his initial plan was to cut either Usopp's arm off or his own. The moment was hilarious in itself, but when the two chose option B, things got even funnier. Zoro proceeded to have Usopp hold his sword and use him as part of his moves. The entire moment was just amusing and deserves a spot on this list for being one of Zoro's funniest moments. The fact that the plan sort of worked just made everything all the better.
笑ってねえで後悔しろよもう二度と来ねえぞ今みてえに俺を討ち取るチャンスはよ世界征服
Shrinking its way onto the list is Child Zoro back when he was first learning the ways of the sword. We've become accustomed to seeing Zoro using a sword in his mouth, but did you know that he was only a kid when he thought of such an idea? When facing off against Guina, Zoro believed that more swords meant more power, and so he ended up holding 3 swords in each hand and 3 swords in his mouth, which dropped midway in an attempt to beat her. It was a miserable failure, but the moments define how Zoro grew up as a swordsman and from where he drew his inspiration to become the greatest swordsman in the world. After losing badly to Guina, Zoro trained exceptionally hard, even holding dumbbells in his mouth so he could later put a sword there. Definitely a historical moment, as this would be the birthplace of the 3-sword style. Coming in at number 21, we have Zoro versus the Samurai. There were a whole host of moments in the gorgeously animated Wano arc, and this was one of those moments that truly shined. Told to commit seppuku by the samurai, Zoro was given a small ornamental blade that was supposed to be used to stab himself because he was accused of cutting someone in the streets. Zoro instead imbued the blade with haki and cut down the real slasher along with a building. Fans of the series remember how Zoro was defeated by Mihawk using a really tiny blade, so watching Zoro himself use an equally tiny blade showcased how far he'd come along from the start of the series. Zoro then proceeded to cut up a whole bunch of samurai one after another with minimal effort. Looks like the lessons with Mihawk paid off, eh? Next up, we have the time when Zoro was trapped on Mr. 3's candle service set. During the Little Garden arc, Zoro, Vivi, and Nami had the misfortune of running into Mr. 3 of Baroque Works. The situation was pretty perilous, as staying stuck would lead to the gang hardening into statues. This situation led to one of Zoro's most brain-dead and hilarious moments. Initially, Zoro decided to cut off his own legs and even got halfway through before Luffy showed up. We'd probably end up with a version of Zoro that's similar to Shiki if he went through with it. Anyway, after that initial plan, Zoro just thought up a pose since he wanted to at least look good as a statue. The entire situation was mind-boggling and hilarious at the same time, since you know that Zoro would prefer getting his legs chopped off than going down without fighting to the bitter end. Coming up next is another moment where Zoro used his famous Death Lion song. In other words, his Shishi Son Son. Just when our gang thought they were done with the fights in Thriller Bark, a new opponent entered the field. Bartholomew Kuma, a warlord of the sea and user of the pawpaw fruit, showed up and absolutely decimated the already exhausted Straw Hats along with most of Thriller Bark. Everyone tries fighting off against Kuma, but to no avail. But the shining moment is when Zoro ends up being the only person who doesn't get knocked out from Kuma's blast. Even after taking all that damage throughout Thriller Bark, taking on Oars 1v1 for a while and then taking on Kuma 1v1, Zoro was still the only one to get straight back up after the Ursa's shock to protect Luffy and use the Shishi Son Son against Kuma. Another moment arose right after this one, but we'll discuss that in a bit because next up we have Zoro fighting T-Bone. Fights between swordsmen are highly sought after, and this was one of those fights where Zoro shined. T-Bone himself was a marine who had significant mastery over the sword, having enough prowess to launch flying slashes from the force of his cuts. His nickname was the Ship Cutter, since his cuts could easily slice large ships. During the Water 7 arc, T-Bone had some further notable feats of strength, one of which was cutting down a Sea King in one blow. You can see how strong T-Bone seems to be, but this wasn't enough to face off against a Straw Hat swordsman. During their fight, Zoro destroyed T-Bone's blade and knocked him into the sea with force. The moment showed that Zoro wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Next, we have Zoro against the Bounty Hunters. Now, you may have forgotten, but Zoro was originally a bounty hunter himself, so facing off against multiple bounty hunters is interesting to think of. Glad we don't have to think of it though, since Zoro actually did fight against 100 bounty hunters from Baroque Works. Facing off against the bounty hunters, they initially lose sight of Zoro after he uncovers their identity, so they decide to kill him. What happens next is that we see Zoro in the crowd, and soon after, he begins dispatching the bounty hunters at an unprecedented speed. He truly shows off how strong he is in the moment and proves himself to be a one-man army, showing that the bounty hunters can't even compare to his skills and prowess. Coming up next is the moment when Zoro defeats Mr. 1. Now, prior to this, Zoro had already been established as a capable swordsman, but he was still unable to cut through hard objects like steel. All that would change in his fight with Daz Bones, otherwise known as Mr. One. Mr. One has incredible endurance and strength, coupled with the Super no Mi, a devil fruit that allows him to turn any part of his body into sharp steel blades, making his body itself as hard as steel. During the majority of this fight, Zoro is on the losing end until he finally understands the meaning behind his master's words, that a swordsman who can cut nothing can cut anything. At this point, Zoro looks incredibly cool as he gets up from Daz Bones' supposed finishing move and then proceeds to cut through his steel body with a single slash. Nearing the halfway point in this list now, we have the moment when Zoro defeats Ryuma. Well, not the original Ryuma, but rather his animated body. Shimotsuki Ryuma was a legendary samurai from Wano and had earned the title of Sword God due to his swordsmanship. After Gekko Moria reanimated him, he stood as an antagonist. Ryuma first took out Brook, but was then intercepted by Zoro, starting off this legendary moment. The entire fight was just awesome, with mass destruction everywhere as the two swordsmen fought it out. Eventually, Zoro defeated Ryuma, who then gave him the legendary sword Shisui, as Ryuma believed it would prefer to serve the man who defeated him. Zoro gaining a sword is always an awesome moment, but getting one after fighting an overpowered zombie, that just made that moment even more better.
刀はもらうが、勝負はなかったことにしようぜ。和の国の侍。
Next, we have the time Zoro ate a rice ball a little girl bought for him.
だから言ったろ。
うまかった。ごちそうさま。
Fans of the series must remember this moment, as it was also the time when Zoro wasn't yet part of the Straw Hats. Zoro let himself get caught by the Marines to protect a little girl named Rika. He was hung up in a courtyard with no food and water, so the little girl brought Zoro a rice ball while Luffy and Kobe watched from the walls. Unfortunately, Helmeppo showed up at the time and berates Rika's rice ball before throwing it down and kicking it into the dirt. Luffy shows up and Zoro tells him to pick up the ruined rice ball and feed it to him. Now, this moment shows how pure-hearted Zoro really is inside his tough exterior, and that he deserves to be one of the good guys. It's a really sweet moment that further convinced Luffy to force Zoro into the crew.
Nice! Zoro!
お安いご用だ、キャプテン。
Next on the list, we have Zoro fully controlling the legendary sword Enma.
それでいい。
Now, Enma is amongst the 21 great grade swords, the best swords in the whole world. The sword itself has near-perfect cutting ability and was previously wielded by Oden, but its drawback is that it releases the user's armament haki excessively, making it really hard to wield. Now, unfortunately, Zoro had to wield this overbearing sword while fighting Kaido's top commander, King, and a bunch of other goons. It was a pretty tight spot to learn how to master something, but Zoro proved to be in a league of his own. During this pinch, Zoro learns to control Enma and readying himself for another awesome fight. This wouldn't be the height of his growth though, as we'll see in the next entry, which is Zoro taking an attack from both Emperors of the Sea. You may have two of the strongest pirates in the entire world, so it would be a major achievement to take down even one of their attacks and live to tell the tale, since you'd have to be the strongest of the strong. But Zoro's feat surpasses even that, as he blocked a combined attack from both Big Mom and Kaido, resulting in one of the most epic moments around. The attack was strong enough to wipe out all the worst generation pirates present there at the time.
Why are you looking at me like that? Why are you so calm? We are all about to die!
So Zoro taking one for the team is definitely one of his most recent iconic moments, and that animation was just gorgeous, to the point where you won't be forgetting it anytime soon.
Zoro や、生きてるか?
Before starting on the top 10, we've got the moment when Zoro defeats Monet. When Dashigi and Zoro were against Monet, Monet incorrectly assumed that Zoro wouldn't attack her due to her being a woman and proceeded to injure Dashigi. But right when Monet had bitten into Dashigi's shoulder, Zoro swooped in and cut her cheek, making her let go. Zoro then walks towards the injured Monet, and so she begins stepping back in fear before he slices her in half without imbuing Haki in his attack. The fear Zoro delivered into Monet's mind was enough to have her paralyzed and unable to control her body. Zoro didn't even need to give it his all. His strength was enough to make Monet panic, and that's what's so cool about this moment. Even though Zoro didn't slice her with the intent to kill, his strength was still enough to leave a lasting impression on her mind. If you're slicing through this video like Zoro through his enemies, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more adventures. Moving on to the top 10 of this list, we have another moment from Wano, and that's the fight between Zoro and Killer, a member of the Kid Pirates and a pirate of the worst generation. Killer and Zoro encountered each other for the first time in Wano country. During this time, Zoro and Killer had a showdown. Killer takes on the alias Gamazo to get rid of Hiyori, but Zoro was there to protect her. Killer himself's a notably strong fighter, and we got to see that in all its glory during the fight. Killer was strong and fast enough to pierce Zoro with his sickle, although that ended up being a disadvantage for Killer in the end. In an awesome turn of events, Zoro took the sickle as his third blade and used the 3-sword star Purgatory Onigiri to take down Killer. Next up, we'll be continuing from the time when Zoro used Sogeking as a sword. Right after that, Zoro fought one-on-one with Gaku, an assassin from CP9. Gaku was impressively strong as he could match Zoro blow for blow and could even use his neck to slash things in his human giraffe form. His Rank Yaku proved to be quite the menace, but not for long, as Zoro began giving it his all. To defeat Gaku, Zoro used an unprecedented 9-sword style. His move, Asura, would be cemented as one of Zoro's strongest and coolest moves by far. Zoro uses Asura to disperse Gaku's Amane Dachi before cutting down and defeating Gaku. This move would go down as one of Zoro's most iconic moves and continues to be cemented in the memories of fans. Coming in at number 8, we have the time Zoro begs Mihawk. During the Sabodi Island chaos, Kuma destroys the Straw Hats, launching them into islands far away from each other. Zoro happened to be sent to Guraigana Island, where he met Dracul Mihawk, the current strongest swordsman in the world. Realizing how weak he was, Zoro begged the man he wanted to surpass to train him and help him become stronger so he could protect his captain and crewmates. Mihawk saw that Zoro was willing to humble himself to ask for help, so he agreed to help train him, even though he found it funny that he'd be teaching someone who wanted to essentially defeat him. The moment showed that Zoro was willing to put aside his pride to become stronger for himself and his crewmates, and proved to be a very moving moment for fans all over.
不器用なやつめ。お前のような男がプライドを捨てるときは必ず誰かのためだと決まっている。
Zoro obtained a cursed sword by chance when he was shopping for new swords. It was a cool moment because the Sandai Kitetsugu is known for being incredibly dangerous due to its curse, which brings misfortune and death to its wielders. Despite the risks, Zoro decided to take on the challenge of mastering the sword, showcasing his determination and fearlessness as a swordsman. He literally threw the sword into the air with his arm sticking out, a move to test whether his luck was stronger than the sword's curse. That move could have led to him losing his arm, which is what made the moment so exciting. This scene just emphasized Zoro's adventurous spirit and his willingness to face formidable obstacles in his quest to become stronger. Just before we delve into the top 5 of this list, we have the time when Zoro stopped Luffy from going to get Usopp after he left the crew.
一味を抜けるってのはそんなに簡単なことなのか。
いいえ、でも
This was due to a disagreement over the fate of the Going Merry. Usopp wanted to repair the ship and keep using it, while the rest of the crew, led by Luffy, believed it was time to retire the Merry. Now this disagreement escalated into a heated argument, during which Usopp challenged Luffy's authority as captain. Feeling hurt and rejected, Usopp ultimately decided to leave. Zoro intervened to prevent Luffy from going to Usopp during a crucial moment because he recognized that Usopp had crossed the line by challenging Luffy's authority and leaving the crew. Zoro understood the importance of maintaining unity within the crew and respecting Luffy's position as captain. Zoro showed that his moral code was even above his friendship with the crew, and he wouldn't let his captain be disrespected. Prior to begging the strongest swordsman in the world for training, Zoro had fought him. And this was back when Zoro was a relative fledgling and the adventure had just begun. During the Baratie arc, Zoro came face to face with Dracul Mihawk and challenged him to a duel. Mihawk held the title of the strongest swordsman in the world, and since this was Zoro's ultimate goal, it was no wonder that Zoro chose to fight him then and there. Unfortunately for Zoro though, he wasn't anywhere close to being a challenge for Mihawk, who fought him with a small knife. Zoro was thoroughly defeated, but Mihawk left him alive as he saw potential in the green-haired swordsman. This moment showed fans and Zoro the obstacle that stood in front of him and his dream, and marked the beginning of a long journey that Zoro would have to take to fulfill his long-time goal. Before we reveal the top 3 list, we have Zoro cutting Pika.
一大三千大戦世界
Pika was considered one of the top executives of the Don Quixote pirates, serving as the leader of the Pika army. He possessed the power of the Stone fruit, which allowed him to manipulate stone, granting him immense strength and the ability to reshape terrain at will. Pika demonstrated considerable combat prowess during the Dressrosa arc, creating massive stone structures and launching devastating attacks. He was literally almost the size of a city, but that didn't mean much to Zoro. After spending quite some time chasing after Pika's actual body, Zoro launched towards Pika and ended up cutting the stone behemoth right at the waist with his 3-sword style, shocking every onlooker at the feat. No one could possibly imagine that Zoro could cut something so huge, so the moment stuck with everyone and showed how strong Zoro had become after the time skip. Coming in at number 3 of this list, we have Zoro defeating King. Now this fight is one of the most recent fights we've witnessed, and it had some of the best animation around. Zoro versus the top commander of the Beast Pirates. As one of Kaido's top commanders, King possesses tremendous physical strength, exceptional combat skills, and the ability to transform into a Pteranodon through his Devil Fruit power, the Dragon Devil Fruit model Pteranodon. Additionally, King is a skilled swordsman as well as a Lunarium, so it's no wonder that this was one of the best fights we could see, as both of these characters were in a league of their own. Every moment of the fight was intense and full of some gorgeous choreography. Seeing Zoro defeat King at the end of such an awesome fight made it all the more better, as Zoro finally seemed closer to his dream of becoming the best swordsman in the world. Up next, we have the moment where Zoro cuts Kaido. Now before this, we already talked about how big of an achievement it was to simply survive an all-out attack from an Emperor of the Sea. However, this moment by Zoro was on a whole other level, as he actually cut an Emperor of the Sea. As Kaido was walking towards a knocked out Luffy, Zoro took his stance and began releasing his haki. This made even Kaido look back, as he sensed Oden's power within Zoro. Hearing Zoro tell Kaido to smash his head in first before going for his captain sent goosebumps down every fan's spine right before he used Demon Aura, 9-sword style Asura to attack. Zoro literally deflected Kaido's attack before going in and cutting him across his chest. It was such an outstanding moment, as it literally left a mark on the strongest creature in the world and further showed how Zoro would always stand up for his captain. Speaking of which, the top entry on this list is Zoro taking all of Luffy's pain. We already talked about the moment when Zoro was the only one to withstand Kuma's attack before counter-attacking back in Thriller Bark, but what happened after that moment took the cake. Realizing that he couldn't defeat Kuma, Zoro offered his own head to Kuma in place of Luffy's, choosing his captain's life over his own ambition. He also knocks out Sanji right after to protect him before Kuma gives Zoro the option of taking over all of Luffy's pain instead of giving his life. Kuma then proceeds to extract all of Luffy's pain, and Zoro, the badass that he is, dives headfirst into all of it, even though he was severely injured himself. In the aftermath, Sanji woke up and saw Zoro's state as blood surrounded him. When Sanji asked Zoro what had happened, Zoro simply replied, "Nothing happened." It was the best Zoro moment by far and could quite possibly stay the best moment for ages to come.
何もなかった。
And with that, we're wrapping up this list of the top 25 Zoro moments in One Piece. With so many badass Zoro moments, we're sure that we may have missed some of your favourite entries, or at least your ranking would be a little bit different from ours, so don't keep us hanging and be sure to comment down below any moments that you think should have made this list. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe so we can show you more of the best moments around. See you next time.